Should we be handing over our prisons, our commons, to private corporations more focused on quarterly profits than corrections and rehabilitation? Let's ask my next guest, Austin Petersen, Libertarian commentator and director of production at FreedomWorks. Austin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for having
me. So we've got, you're welcome. We've got corporations running prisons. Is that a great idea?
Well, we've got about 3 to 4% of the nation's prisons being run by private corporations. So most of the prisons in the United States are run by the federal government. And I certainly do sympathize with...
But we see a creep of corporations buying prisons. I mean, CCA is going to Florida. They're going to a bunch of states saying, sell us your prisons.
They absolutely are.
Idea?
And the Florida Department of Management Services is showing that the taxpayers are getting a 10 to 27% less expenditure rate for their prisons. So there are some bonuses to having privately run prisons in the United States. And again, it is a very small number, 3 to 4% nationwide.
You're right. Okay, so maybe that's one Florida study. Tucson Citizen in Arizona, where a similar deal was made with CCA, found the taxpayers are losing $3.5 million a year. So it's still up in the air whether or not this is actually a good deal for taxpayers. But strictly on the idea of letting for-profit corporations take over this part of our commons, do you think that's a good idea?
Well, that's really difficult, Sam. I mean, I do sympathize with the liberal viewpoint. We have over-incarceration in this country. We have like the highest prison population in the entire world. And if a libertarian were president of the United States, we would have way less prisoners because there would be all of the nonviolent drug offenders would be released, and you wouldn't have this sort of incarceration rates that we have right now. But if you're going to have a system that's going to run enforcement of prisons, you know, the government has the ability to set the law. The lawmakers are setting the laws. Now it's up to us to decide how we want to have the enforcement of those laws. The Supreme Court has held that the adjudication, or excuse me, the enforcement of these laws in the prison systems can be run by private systems. And many of the private systems that are running today, the 3 to 4% that I spoke of in the United States, are running at a profit and are running an efficient system that is a benefit to the taxpayers. And if you want more revenue for programs like teachers and schools and highways and things that liberals all agree that the government should be funding, then wouldn't you rather have that money go to things like the nationalist health care scheme that we have, Obamacare and things like that, than go and run it to violent prisoners?
The greatest giveaway to the private health insurance industry. But let's not get off on Obamacare here. But you keep saying running efficiently. Okay, so I'm giving you that assumption. Other than what we're seeing in Arizona, where it looks like they're losing money.
Right.
Let's assume that. But let's assume that the way they run it efficiently is by crowding prisoners into cells, by neglecting, basic human services for prisoners.
Right.
Is that a good idea? I mean, isn't that what happens when you inject the profit motive?
Well, it happens to both.
It
happens to both. But here's the thing: if you're a prisoner and you sue the state, it's much more difficult to sue the state than it is to sue a private corporation. Prisoners have a lot more legal operations,
It's pretty difficult to sue a corporation.
Well, it's a lot easier to sue a corporation than it is to sue the state. There's a lot of conflict of interest there because if a prison guard who works for the state has a deal with the governor, then there's a chance that he might get bailed out.
You're getting off on suing. I'm just asking you a simple question.
That's a recompensation. Remember, if you're a prisoner in a jail cell, I would much rather be run at a private-run institution because if they screw up, then I have the right of recompensation. I can go in and I can take them to court. But it's really hard to take the state to court. Remember, the state makes their own, the state, you take the king's coin, you sing the king's song. So there's a lot of corruption that goes on at state-run facilities as well. So and there's a lot of mismanagement. It happens in both areas. And I would like to see a lot less incarceration in this country. And if you're talking about things like rehabilitation, you have to look at the recidivation rates between prisoners of state-run facilities and the private-run facilities. They have these programs that the inmates participate in: educational, vocational, life skills programming. 79.3% of prisoners in the private sector participate in these programs versus 21.3% in the public sector.
Okay, you've got your numbers. I've got mine. In Idaho, CCA prisons are a lot more violent. In Arizona, they cost a lot more. Okay, let's talk about let's take it a little bit broader here. Let's talk about the for-profit motive. Just going into comments in Detroit, we have a water and sewage plant that belonged to the city that just got sold off to a private corporation. We have parking meters in Chicago being sold off and things like that. We have education. Schools being sold off. These are all things that used to be part of the commons, that used to belong to the taxpayers and to the government.
I think
Do you see a danger of injecting the for-profit motive into these things?
No, because it all depends on what you think people's motives are. If you think that state officials are somehow motivated by different things than private officials are, then I think that's a little bit naive. You have to understand that everybody is going to be motivated by profit. Everybody wants to make more money. But if you want to make more money at the behest of the state, you're taking taxpayer money versus if it's run by...
What is the CEO motivated by?
What is a what?
CEO. What is his main motivation?
Well, is to increase the
profits quarterly?
Yes, absolutely. But if the profits are made made voluntarily from the people who are voluntarily purchasing a service, that's a different thing, like water. You know what I mean? It's another thing if the taxpayer is coming in and saying, I have to subsidize water for the entire community, whereas if the community says we're all voluntarily purchasing water. It's force and coercion versus voluntary interaction. I want a voluntary society, not a coercive society, Sam.
Overhead costs when it comes to health insurance, a coercive society. Overhead costs when it comes to health insurance. Private health insurance company, it's about a 20% overhead cost. Medicare, it's about 1.3%. A lot of that has to do with the profit motive there. When it comes to delivering health care more efficiently, and that goes across all sectors. So when you inject that profit motive into delivering water, suddenly you have a much higher overhead. When you inject that into running correctional facilities, suddenly you have a much higher overhead. Isn't it by the very nature of the way private corporations operate that they're going to cost more to meet that quarterly profit
Not
demand?
necessarily, actually, because under the statutory authority in Ohio where this prison is being run, any outsourcing of private facilities have to save at least 5% on operational costs. You see, a state-run facility doesn't have that sort of a profit incentive. If they don't have a profit incentive, then they have no reason to compete and to keep costs low. So if you do have a private-run facility, then they are forced by the contract that they have, they're obligated to keep their costs at a competitive rate.
And the state is obligated to fill those prisons at 90% to maximize the profitability of those
which I actually do disagree with. And the United Kingdom has a new program that they're running right now where they incentivize, rather than a forced 90% rate of incarceration, they incentivize the prisons by saying that you have to show a reduced recidivist rates, which means that they have to show that prisoners are not coming back and committing violent crimes again. So I think the UK has a great model there. Florida is just starting to institute it right now. But the incentive should not be how many prisoners we have. It should be how many prisoners are not coming back into the jail.
Okay. When it comes to, I want to move on to our energy sector here.
Okay.
We've got oil companies running around, deciding they're not going to cut their carbon emissions. Whether you believe in global warming or not, I don't know. You don't have to answer that. I doubt you do.
A lot of evidence shows that there is some warming, yes.
Okay. Whatever you want to say about it. It's definitely cheaper in the long run to start transitioning to some sort of alternative energy. It's cleaner for everybody. The asthma, cancer rates cannot be denied. When a corporation is focused strictly on quarterly profits, where's the incentive to lose out on those quarterly profits for a few years to make that transition to clean energy without some sort of government to step in and provide those incentives for companies that want to start up and move toward alternative energies? You have just a minute.
It's a good question. Okay, so the thing is that where's the incentive, right? So who are the people that are consuming the energy, right? I think that the burden of the cost of energy should be placed on those people who are producing the energy and those who are consuming the energy. So, for example, if I go and I fly an airplane, I have to pay for the cost of the energy that flies the plane, that fuels the plane. So the people who are consuming the energy should have to pay the costs for whatever it is to work that industry and to pay those energy costs. So that's where the burden should be.
And we'll wait for the people to sell that while the world burns and the waters rise.
Thank you, Sam.
Austin, thanks a lot for coming on.
I appreciate it.